Hello, I would like to welcome you to today's TechNet webcast overview of Windows Deployment Services. For more Microsoft webcasts, go to microsoft.com/webcasts. I would now like to introduce today's presenter, Chris Henley. Chris Henley is a member of our seminar sales team at TechNet and has worked in networking since 1993. Chris is passionate about learning, sharing his knowledge, and technology. He has extensive experience with Microsoft Windows operating systems and specializes in Active Directory design, implementation, and support. Chris loves showing people how new tools and products can improve their businesses and especially their lives. He's delivered thousands of live presentations and gave the keynote speech at the Network Professional Association Awards during the Interop 2005 conference. And Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Eric, and welcome to all of you. We're going to have some fun today, and we're going to talk about Windows Deployment Services. During the course of the session today, we're actually going to try and cover a fairly large amount of material in the limited amount of time that we have available to us. I want to kind of structure the things that we do in a fairly specific order. When we talk about deployment, in order to really get a firm grasp or firm understanding on what's going on in deployment with Windows Vista operating systems and moving into the Longhorn server time frame, I really think it's important that you understand an overview not just of where we are, but a little bit about where we've come from and also kind of where we're going with the technologies that we're going to talk about today. So the first thing that we want to do in terms of coverage is we want to kind of cover a little bit of an overview of deployment technologies. I want to introduce you to Microsoft's Windows Deployment Services. We're going to call that WDS for the rest of the session. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some detail about the WDS solutions. We're going to walk you through the process of using the tools, moving through some of the techniques that you might actually implement in your organization, talk a little bit more about what's actually out there in terms of WDS, some of the background technologies. Hopefully by the time we're through, you'll have a good firm grasp on the concepts related to Windows Deployment Services and an understanding of the image file format, the WIM file, a little bit of understanding of how to use the tools associated with the Business Desktop Deployment 2007 toolkit and the Windows Automated Installation Kit that would be associated with that tool. If we can get through that stuff during the course of today's session, I'm going to be very pleased. Now, some helpful experience. It would be nice if you had used remote installation services before. RIS is essentially being replaced with WDS, and a lot of the things that you know about remote installation services would actually be beneficial to you in a Windows Deployment Services environment. An understanding of Windows Server 2003 administration would of course be beneficial, and of course, because we are talking about deployment, we're going to be using a tool called Microsoft Windows Pre-Installation Environment, or WinPE. The pre-installation environment allows us to do essentially what the title suggests, create and configure deployment solutions in a pre-installation world, or something that's actually loaded into memory. Now we're going to talk about all of these in much more detail throughout the course of the session. This session is listed as a level 200 session, so we will kind of start at the basics and build our way up. I always put level 200 on my slide decks so that I don't scare anybody away who is at an entry level, and at the same time it gives us the opportunity to move into some material that's a little bit more advanced than 200 level, maybe even the 3 and possibly even 400 level before we're through. Now by way of agenda, I've broken the session down into 3 different segments. First we're going to talk about an introduction to Windows Deployment Services. Then we're going to go through an exploration of the Windows Deployment Services environment. And finally we're going to go and discuss implementing and managing Windows Deployment Services in your organization. Now the first thing that I want to do is give you a little bit of background in terms of where we've come from with operating system deployments. And we probably should go back and look at the WinNT32 process associated with our RIS server. Now, in the past, when we looked at issues associated with deployment, we had a number of different challenges that we were trying to overcome, and a number of different tools that we actually put into place to allow us to get the benefits that we now know is commonplace with WDS. Really what we're looking for here is a big picture view in terms of history. When we look at management components, for example, I put up on the screen here WinNT32, we had the ability to customize our installation through a series of different answer files. However, we really started to recognize that customers typically use this type of technology just once, and they'd use it to capture their system, and then they would go out and they would use mass image deployments as the actual solution to deploying the operating systems out to their clients. Many of us did this. We would use traditional answer files. We would customize a single machine, and then we would go and image that box, use a third-party solution to deploy the images out to the clients on our network. So while the unattended answer solution was a good one, the answer files allowed us to automate deployment a little bit better, it really wasn't the solution that we were all looking for. Next we moved in and we said, let's introduce Remote Installation Server, or RIS. With the introduction of Remote Installation Server, which actually supported script or file-based deployments, file-based images were managed on a single RIS server. Now, this worked with Windows 2000. It allowed you to install a local copy of the operating system to other computers, even at remote locations. And with RIS, a client computer would actually contact a DHCP server, get an IP address, then contact a boot server, and then go to the process of installing the operating system. RIS was a good tool, but again, oftentimes we saw a similar result with RIS that we saw back with the answer files in an NT32 situation. We'd make a single image, and then we'd use third-party imaging solution tools to actually deploy those images out to the clients in our network. Well, in terms of development, the next thing that we actually saw historically from automated operating system deployment was actually this tool called ADS. Automated Deployment Services, or ADS, actually introduced sector-based image formats. Now, ADS is actually an add-on to Windows Server 2003 Enterprise Edition. It provided a solution for deploying Windows Server operating systems. It did have support for script-based mass server administration. ADS also enables administrators to administer hundreds of servers as if they were just a single server. The ADS solution was administrator initiated, whereas RIS was really server deployment, or excuse me, RIS server deployments were really more user initiated. We would plug in a machine onto the network, or a user would connect to a network and we would deploy an image that way. So as we move in and we start looking at ADS, ADS starts to move the Windows deployment concept more to the administrative side of things rather than to the user-initiated side. Microsoft, of course, released the XP Embedded product, which was also sector-based, but was specific to deploying your embedded devices. So to deploy the traditional Windows XP operating system, for example, that really wasn't of significant use to us. Now, with the introduction of the SMS operating, the Systems Management Server, or SMS, to the operating system's environment, we really kind of changed the picture a little bit more. Now, with SMS, we could use something called Operating System Deployment, or OSD, and we actually saw the first release of something called the WIM format. The WIM is the Windows image format, and as opposed to other sector-based formats, this WIM format was actually file-based. Now, this format was specific to the SMS release, and it didn't work really well across other deployment solutions. We recognized that we really needed to have a single deployment format with a single set of tools that could actually be used across all of our Windows deployment solutions. And the solution that we actually came up with is this one. We use something called a WIM. Now, while we use the same terminology, the same language that we use with the OSD from SMS, this particular WIM file format, we should probably go back and talk a little bit about this. There were a series of different design goals around how to build an image format, about what needed to be enabled within the format. First things first, we really needed to have a unified format, and we've already talked about this on the previous slide. We needed a format that could actually be used across all of our deployment strategies. It couldn't be just SMS or just BDD. That isn't really effective. I need something that works across the board so that regardless of the size or type of organization that I'm working with, I know how I'm going to execute deployments. So with this in mind, we developed the Windows image format. Now the Windows image format, or WIM format, is actually hardware agnostic, meaning you need only one image to actually address many different hardware configurations. For those of you that are out there thinking, what did he just say? Did he just say WIM is hardware agnostic? Yeah, that's the case. When we talk about WIM file formats, the WIM format does not make one image per hardware configuration. It does exactly the opposite. We make one image and we ignore the hardware configuration. Now when I say ignore, we use the term agnostic, and agnostic is probably the appropriate term for this particular technology. It isn't that we don't do anything with the hardware. We still load drivers, we still have configuration for HALs, we still do all of those things. The thing that is of importance is that we create one image file with the installation files for the operating system and the components that would go along with it. Those files are what we use to deploy the image. Once the image is deployed, then we address the hardware. So you don't end up managing tens or hundreds or even thousands of different images, but depending on the size of your organization and the number of hardware configurations you have. Instead, we simply manage a single WIM, Windows image file, and that image file will contain a limited number of images, which makes management and administration so much easier for us. Now with the Windows image format, or the WIM file is actually a container. And the container can actually contain more than one image. Now this makes administration even easier for us because now I have a single image format file, and that format file can contain a series of different images from our organization. So for example, maybe I build an image that works for the sales team computers, and another one that works for the marketing team, and another one for manufacturing, and another one for executives. Now the thing that's really cool about the WIM format is that it uses a special storage function called single instance storage, where the files that are going to be necessary to install the operating system are stored one time regardless of the number of images contained within the WIM. So in this example, I have 4 different images. I'm not going to store 4 copies of the installation files for Windows Vista, for example. Instead, I'm going to store one instance of those files and then simply use them in the 4 different images. So using this single instance storage really saves us on disk space. Now, a situation where you might want to have multiple images would be if you wanted to have an image that contains, say, Windows Vista operating system, another that contains an organization's core applications. Maybe you're going to add in a series of custom applications that you designed and built, or maybe you want to add third-party applications or even applications like Microsoft Office to an image. All of that can easily be done with the WIM format, separate images, single WIM file, single instance storage to save myself some disk space. Now, in addition, the WIM image format actually enables compression as well as single instance. So we can actually reduce the size of the WIM even further by using a compression strategy. Now, there are actually 2 different versions of compression that are available. When we talk about WIMs, I'm not going to give you a detailed discussion of compression, how those work. If you're interested in that, hit the webcast site, go out. I've done a webcast talking about Windows Vista deployment using the ImageX tools and imaging Windows Vista. Go in and watch those. You'll get a much more detailed discussion of what's actually going on with compression inside of the WIM. When we do single instance storage, one of the things that I constantly get asked about, and let's go ahead and take this as a question now. When we talk single instancing is really just a technique that stores only a single instance of a file, even though multiple images might use it, or it might be used in multiple locations. Now, it eliminates duplicate files by using SHA-1 hashing. So where all the files are hashed, duplicate files are only stored a single time. Now, by using SHA-1 hashing this and using single instance, I can really save myself a tremendous amount of disk space and make deploying images with the WDS tool even more effective. Let's go in and let's look at a timeline of technology that kind of led us to today's solutions, and then we're going to kind of leave the history component behind, shall we? So in terms of a technology roadmap, if we were to go back and we were to look historically starting in about 2003 time frame, and then kind of bring us to today, and then moving forward. There have really been three overlapping solutions that had, unfortunately, dissimilar infrastructures, and there were a little bit of gaps in the functionality between these. Now, new releases of these solutions were used to address short-term SMS and ADS needs. However, the same problems really essentially still existed. So we had SMS 2003, Automated Deployment Services version 1.0, and then RIS in Windows Server 2003. They all kind of focused in on their own thing. They had their own deployment arena where they worked very, very well together. Unfortunately, we had a large amount of gaps in that structure, and we needed to really do something about it. So the something about it comes in the form of SMS 2003 OSD, so the Operating System Deployment Feature Pack, then Virtual Server 2005's Migration Toolkit, which actually is a great tool, and then the introduction recently of Automated Deployment Services version 1.1. Now you'll notice that we still have RIS down there for deployment with Windows Server 2003, and it would stay that way unless we moved in and made some more significant changes. Let's hit one other thing here first before we continue. SMS version 4 consolidates the ADS and SMS components. So SMS version 4 operating system deployment builds can actually be used now with WDS. So as we move into the Longhorn Server timeframe, those of you that are using SMS, you're going to get a full-featured set of tools that would allow you to do high-quality deployments and automated deployments using Windows Deployment System, or WDS Windows Deployment Services, as well as the administrative control that you're used to from the SMS family. Now, for those of you that aren't using SMS, not a problem. As we move to the release of Windows Longhorn Server, our assumption is that you're going to use WDS, and you're going to use that as a replacement for Remote Installation Services. Now, remember, Remote Installation Services, or RIS, was the original in-box solution for operating system deployment, but it had its problems, it had its limitations. The most immediate was the fact that, unfortunately, as much as we love it, there really isn't support for Windows Vista. So if you want to deploy Windows Vista clients into your organization, RIS doesn't support doing that. And we had other problems as well. Lack of management tools was an issue. Localization, accessibility, fragmentation, the pre-boot execution environment, those kinds of things. We really had a series of different associated problems that kind of went along with using RIS, which I think is why many of us built a single image and then used third-party tools to deploy them with. We want to get away from that, and I want to introduce you to this WDS toolset. The WDS platform was really designed for the mid to large size organization and for you core OEM operators. The nice thing about WDS is, for all intents and purposes, it is nothing more than an updated, redesigned version of RIS. It assists with rapid adoption, with deployments of Windows operating system. It does have support for Windows Vista. It has a much better tool set than what we saw with the Remote Installation Server, and the platform works in small, mid, large, and OEM environments without issue. So WDS was actually developed to deliver a great in-the-box experience so that you can provision operating systems, provide platform components, really make custom solutions, and then deploy those with WDS. Now, I told you in the previous comment that I made that for all intents and purposes, WDS is really just an upgrade to RIS, and that's exactly what it is. What I'd like to do is take a couple of moments with you, and I'm going to go ahead and we're going to pull out to a quick demonstration here. I'm going to demonstrate a number of the concepts that would be associated with using WDS throughout the course of this session. Now, with that said, I'm actually going to use a virtual machine, a couple of them. One of them is a domain controller. Now, the domain controller that we're going to be using in this demonstration is called Seattle DC01. Let me go ahead and pull up that virtual machine, get that moving, and then we can get ourselves into position for some demonstration here. All right, hang on just a second. Hit my sharing slide, and we should be good to go. Oh, let's go ahead and allow that. And we'll minimize out. I'm watching what you're seeing on one of my laptops as well, trying to make sure that we get the appropriate content on screen. You have to bear with us for a second because it can take a moment for us to have things run appropriately. There we go. So what you're looking at, Seattle DC01. Now, Seattle DC01, if you look down here in the bottom right-hand corner, is not a Windows Longhorn server. I know many of you are probably thinking to yourselves, hey, WDS sounds great. I love the tools. I love the potential to deploy Windows Vista operating systems out to my network. However, it's not going to do me any good if I have to run it on a Longhorn server because I'm not running Longhorn server yet, still in beta. Well, luckily, WDS is an upgrade to Remote Installation Server. Just literally can use the automated installation kit and update. I'll show you how to do this here with this demonstration. We can update remote installation services on the Windows Server 2003 platform, and we can deploy images, whether it's Longhorn Server, Windows Vista, Windows XP, whatever it happens to be in our organization. So let's go ahead, and I want to show you some of how this process works. It really is not significantly difficult. This would be one of your level 200 demonstrations. So we currently have a Windows Server 2003 on our network that's running in WDS legacy mode, meaning it's running remote installation services natively on the server. Now the tools that we're actually going to need for Windows Vista deployments are now actually included in Business Desktop Deployment 2007. This is available for download. It's on the Microsoft website. It includes tools and something called the Windows Automated Installation Kit. We're going to go in and pull that up here for you. As you drop down, there's BDD 2007. You can see Windows Automated Installation Kit is here. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to open this Windows Automated Installation Kit folder, and we're going to find the Windows Deployment Services update for remote installation services. Let's go ahead in here. Let's open WAIK. There's the WDS folder, and inside, as we expand this, you can see there's my deployment services update for x86 machines. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start this update, and you can see it is a self-extracting tab file. Right now, this is available through BDD and through the Windows Automated Installation Toolkit. Now, when we double-click on this, it's going to go ahead and start an installation, and it is actually going to extract the files. We're going to walk through a simple wizard here and agree. When we're done, we're going to be presented with the option of rebooting this particular system. Unfortunately, it does require a reboot. In fact, even on a Longhorn server, it would require a reboot. We're making changes that are going to affect multiple systems here. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. We're going to reboot this particular machine, and we'll actually come back to this in just a couple of minutes after we've had time to talk, and we'll log back on. Now, in terms of the process of upgrading from RIS to WDS, I think you can see that it is not difficult. In fact, the opposite is true. It is incredibly easy to do. When we're working with remote installation services are going to have its own image. We're going to have or other images that we might have built. We're going to have an opportunity, functionally speaking, to fairly easily upgrade from RIS to WDS. You see the process is really just a matter of starting the upgrade, agreeing, and then we're ready for action. Let's drop back here and let's talk about what's actually new in WDS while we're going through the reboot process, shall we? When we look at WDS in terms of what's new, we actually get several enhancements to the RIS feature set. Now, the enhancements support the deployment of Windows Vista and Windows Server Longhorn operating systems. That's a big one. We have native support for something called Windows PE as a boot operating system. Now, Windows PE, remember, stands for Windows Pre-Installation Environment. In the pre-installation environment, you have the ability to unify a single image format, take advantage of all the new WIM file formats, do customization for deployments. you really have a great operating set of tools here. Now there's also an extensible and better performing PXE server component. So for those of you that are running the pre-boot execution environment, there's a new client menu for selecting boot operating systems. We'll actually look at some of these features throughout the rest of this session. In fact, maybe we'll even configure some of these when we get to demonstration here in just a few minutes. One of the big benefits of working with WDS for all intents and purposes, and this is not from a technical side of things, but more from a business side, there is a significant reduction of cost by using WDS that we have not seen in using some of our other systems. Just the simple fact that WIM files are now structured with the ability to have images that are hardware agnostic can save us a tremendous amount of time, effort, and administrative cost in nothing more than simply maintaining images. Now, I am certainly not an expert in cost savings associated with WDS. I certainly know that it happens. I wanted to highlight it here. Let's go in and let's talk to you a little bit more about some of the technical benefits of WDS, if that's okay. When we work with WDS, as new operating systems are released, our organizations may have computers running different versions at the same time. Now, WDS addresses the issue by supporting mixed environments, including Windows XP and Windows Server 2003. I told you at the beginning of the last demo, it does just fine with the mixed environment. WDS provides end-to-end solutions for the deployment of Windows operating systems to both the client side and the server side computers. And in addition, WDS has the ability to deploy the Windows operating system to what's called bare metal computers. So in other words, you can actually have a computer with no operating system installed, nothing, just blank hardware, and we can still use WDS to do the operating system deployment. Now, as your organization actually grows, let's advance here a little bit, the deployment solution kind of needs to be able to continue to provide necessary support for the organization as we go through a growth cycle. We need scalable PXE server. Now this is built in on a unified architecture. We need replaceable plugins, we need core network functionality, and we need it to run without Active Directory. So all of those become possibilities with WDS. Now WDS allows organizations to create deployment solutions that work best for their specific needs. We use WinPE PXE boot files, and they can be used for third-party PXE server use. So you have a lot of tools, a lot of opportunities here. Really, when we look at WDS, we've got what we were looking for in an end-to-end deployment solution for deploying operating systems to the clients in our network. We've extended it beyond the traditional RIS world. Let's transition here in our discussion, and let's start talking about a little bit more of the actual WDS environment. We're going to do a little bit of exploration here together. When we look at the WDS environment itself, some key components that we have talked about already would include things like PXE server, TFTP, Trivial File Transfer Protocol, Windows PE, some of the management tools. Let's go in and let's give you a little bit more detail about these. Now when we talk about components, generally speaking, we're going to say that the components fall into three simple categories. The categories would be PXE, PXE compliance, TFTP, and maybe a little bit of shared folder, image repository, boot images, those kinds of things. So let's go and let's talk a little bit about some of this stuff. When you're looking at a WDS environment, you've got server components and you've got client components. Now on the server side, we're talking about my WDS tools, my deployment tools, my PXE compliant environments, protocols, controls, any of the management associated with the images, all of that stuff's going to go on our server side. When we move in and we start looking to client components, we change things just a little bit different. Client components are actually relatively simple, including a graphical user interface that runs within WinPE and communicates with the server components to select and install the operating system image. The client components are relatively small, unobtrusive, and generally speaking, we're running them out of RAM, not out of actual disk. So they load with the WinPE environment before install. Client can see them, use them minimally. We can actually go to zero-touch deployments with WDS and SMS. In this case, we'll talk about what's called light touch deployments, where the client actually has some interaction as the deployment occurs. Now, in terms of management components, the three components of WDS environment, server, client, and management. Management's our third one. The management components are nothing more than a set of tools that we're going to use to manage the server, the operating system images, and the client accounts. These three components actually consist of several different elements. Let's start with the server components first, and let's talk about what kind of components we're going to see on the server side. With WDS, we rely on the server side, on the pre-boot execution environment technology, to really allow our clients to network boot and then remotely connect over a TCP/IP network connection to WDS. This is the way that we're going to provide the initial connection in order to actually install the operating system. Therefore, the client computers using the process must support remote booting with a PXE-ROM. Now, I know that there are some of you out there that are smiling and thinking to yourself, well, that's great, but what do I do about all these clients that don't have PXE-compatible network cards? Well, you do have the capability in the WDS environment to create a network boot disk. So you can create a network boot disk for those non-PXE compliant machines in your environment. And we'll actually talk you through the process of that here in just a couple of minutes. WDS server component, other things we should talk about, includes the core PXE server, an image store location so we can store the image WIM files, and the communication protocols that we're going to use to communicate between server and client. We said earlier that's going to be Trivial File Transport Protocol, or TFTP. Since we mentioned it, let's talk about it here just briefly. We use TFTP as the communication protocol during PXE boot and during the Windows PE download phase. TFTP is a service protocol. It's used to transfer the files that we would need to do remote boots. It also can help us with maintenance and with troubleshooting on the client side. It's a common protocol. I'm assuming many of you have seen it and already used it. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it here. File share is very important for us on the WDS server. There is a file share. It would contain our Windows PE boot images, our Windows installation images, and then the related management files that I might use in conjunction with WDS. Last but not least, we do have Longhorn Server RMT integration. This is an important concept for us to chat about for just a moment. When we look forward to deploying Longhorn Server, we will need something called RMT integration in order for this to work. Again, the WDS folks, we've got to give them kudos. They've looked ahead, they know what our needs are, and they've built it into Windows deployment services. Let's switch over. Let's talk about the client-side setup application for just a second, and then I think we need to get back in and do a little bit of demonstration for you. Client-side features, we've already talked about this, include the client setup application that really runs within WinPE. Now, in terms of discussion about the client side, when we are loading an operating system, there's kind of a two-phase operation. Well, maybe three-phase. We make the initial connection. Once the initial connection is made, we move in and we load the Windows PE operating system into RAM. Once WinPE is loaded, we have the connection established, a little bit of management control. We actually start the deployment of the WIM files, or the image files themselves. Now, there is a special mode in Windows Vista's image-based setup. We're going to call it IBS. This mode allows the deployment of Vista and Windows Server Longhorn and down-level images. Now, included is logic to communicate with WDS. Now, the IBS mode actually drives the client setup experience with a user interface flow that is unique to WDS installations. So it is, or we do have additional functionality on the client side that we have not seen before. So it is a little bit more than simple WinPE. Now, one of the things that we've done with imaging, which is very important, and we'd probably be remiss if we didn't talk about it here, is we've componentized the image. So the Windows Vista image has a series of different components that can be added as we're installing Windows Vista. One of the ways that we get to hardware agnostics is by using the componentized image. Now, when we look at image components, one of the components that we're actually going to select during install is actually language. So instead of creating all of these different versions of Windows Vista in the different languages that might be supported around the world, instead we create a version of Windows Vista that is agnostic, and then we add the language component to the operating system. This is a dramatic change from what we've ever done with a Windows Vista or a operating system release in the past. Windows Vista introduces componentized installation model, and in this case, one of the things that we'll often have our user do is select the language that they want to install. We provide a high degree of automation. We're using WDS in conjunction with other tools like BDD, Business Desktop Deployment. We can actually move all the way from a situation that uses something like an unattend.txt file for automation into a world where we're using SMS deployments in a zero-touch environment. So you really have a broad spectrum ability working with WDS servers and clients to do automation in an environment that is highly automated, lightly automated. You really get to pick and choose, which is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Let's go and let's switch back to demonstration mode here, and let's go back and log into our server, shall we? I'm going to drop us out to a demonstration slide. Now in this demonstration, we're going to actually configure the WDS server. We're going to add a deployment server. We're going to configure the Pixie server. We're going to explore a little bit of the WDS server properties. Kind of want to walk you through step by step everything that we might see in my WDS environment. So with that said, let's drop out here to a sharing slide, and I'm going to go ahead and we're going to log back into this machine. If I can remember the password, there we go. Now in the earlier demonstration, we upgraded an existing RIS server to WDS, and the update adds two shortcuts to the administrative tools container on the Start menu. Now one for the WDS console, the other is actually for WDS legacy configuration. Now the WDS console starts with no servers added, and you can add multiple WDS servers to the console and then manage your entire Windows deployment infrastructure from a single computer, either locally on the server itself or from your normal Windows XP computer, which is really a nice functionality. Now our next step here will actually be to configure the WDS server for its first use. You can see it's not yet configured, and so we've got to go in and actually do something to make that work. Now this configuration can be done either using Windows Deployment Services Configuration Wizard or using WDS util command at the command prompt. We're going to go ahead and use the wizard because I think it's easier. Running WDS has a number of requirements. Most of the requirements will already be present on your typical network. You can see them here: active DHCP, active DNS, and an NTFS partition on the Windows deployment server for storing images. Important thing to remember here, the NTFS partition cannot be the system partition. We're talking about a separate partition to allow us to contain, among other things, WIM files and images. Let's go ahead and click Next. Now the wizard automatically detects the location of our existing remote installation folder. Now if this folder did not exist on the server, the wizard would automatically suggest placing the remote install folder on the default on the partition with the most free space available. In our case, the default configuration here has already been created. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Now you'll notice we get this option. The default configuration of WDS assumes that the DHCP server and the WDS server are actually on different physical machines. Now when DHCP and WDS exist on the same machine, DHCP must inform the client computer that there's a Pixie server listening on the network by including DHCP option tag 60 in the DHCP offer packet. Now because DHCP listens on port 67 by default, when WDS and DHCP exist on the same computer, the WDS Pixie server is not able to listen on port 67 for incoming PXE boot requests. Now, Pixie server settings are configured on a PXE response settings tab of the server properties page, as we'll see in just a minute. These settings will determine which clients WDS responds to and what action is taken when responding to an unknown client. So in our case, we're going to go ahead and click Respond to All, both known and unknown clients. Now, For unknown clients, you'll notice we could check the box here that says notify administrators and then respond after approval. So if we are going to work with a client that we don't recognize, we are also going to get information passed back to us so that we know about what clients are actually working with WDS in our environment, which I think is actually a very good thing. Let's go ahead and move down, and we'll click Next. Now you'll notice that we're configuring Windows Deployment Services, and as the wizard completes, it's going to commit our settings on the WDS server. It's going to restart the WDS service, and after this is done, we're going to go in and choose to immediately add a new image to the WDS server. So let's go ahead and click Finish. There we go. And I have, for all intents and purposes, a Windows Deployment Server that has now been configured. Let's go and let's look at some of the properties associated with this tool. When I right-click, you can see that I'm in what's called a mixed environment. Now don't confuse this with mixed mode, native mode environments from Active Directory. That's not what we're talking about. In this case, it's listing us as a mixed mode environment because I have images that I have from earlier version of deployment services. I have a RIS image that's still here. And so, as such, I'm seeing the server in a mixed mode. Now, if you wanted to make it native mode, you could actually go in and make only native WIM images. You would have a native server at that point. Let's look at PXE response settings. When we set the PXE response policy in the configuration wizard, the do not respond setting will prevent any server from responding to the client. The respond only requires you to pre-stage the clients in Active Directory. The option that we selected actually directs WDS to respond to all clients, and then we did not select the option for notification to the administrator. We're going to assume that we have control of that environment. Now, if you want to ensure that each client computer is given a unique computer name, you can actually set automatic naming options. Now, by default, WDS will require user authentication to Active Directory. So to ensure a unique computer name, WDS is going to base the computer account name on the user's name. Now you can alter this to base the computer name on the MAC address, the user's first or last name, a standard username, or an incremental number based on the computers in your network. You really have a lot of options in what you can do for naming the computers. You know that we have to have unique computer names. This is how we do it. Let's go to the Boot tab. Windows uses a PXE compliant client to boot to the WDS server, and the server is going to provide a simple boot program based on the client architecture, and you can see it there. Windows Deployment Services allows us to automate both the Windows Deployment Services client and some of the later stages of Windows setup. Now this two-phase approach is accomplished using two different unattended install files, and you can actually see them here. We can have unattended installation and then client account creation portion. Now, again, as we work with unattended installs, we could go out, we can actually find all of this stuff in the WDS client unattend folder. This is what we use to automate the first phase of setup. The DHCP tab, standard settings, we've already discussed them about port 60 versus 67 and running on the same machine. The Advanced tab provides options for how WDS will discover domain controllers and global catalog servers on the network. By default, WDS will query DNS and find the closest server. You can see that it's listed here. Let's go ahead and let's cancel here. Looks good. Now, we mentioned earlier that running WDS in a mixed mode allows you to add RIS-based deployment files on the server. Now, this is done through Windows Deployment Server Setup Wizard. So let's go in and let's use that tool. The requirements for adding an operating system in this way is actually similar to that of WDS itself, except that the option requires the Windows installation media, whereas WDS typically works with a WIM, or a Windows imaging set. You can see that here on the screen. To successfully install and use WDS, you need the following, and we simply reviewed them. Now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tell it that we want to go in and perform a diagnostics check. Now we've already added WDS. We're going to go in and add additional components at this point. Now you can perform diagnostic checks or add images very easily with Windows Deployment Services. In our case, let's go in, let's add the new image. We're going to put it in a standard folder here called Windows. I'm going to change the name because we're looking at a Windows Server 2003 installation. We're going to call it Windows Server 2003. Notice it detects the image type. At this point, we can drop down, provide additional descriptions, or we could customize the image name. For example, if this were going to the marketing department or something, we'd use it there. Now, when we're deploying images, we're going to go in and we're going to specify we want to use the new client installation screens and overwrite the old ones. So as we do that, let's go ahead and click Next. It's going to take it a few minutes to go ahead and generate this image, in fact longer than we have, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that concept, and we're going to let that process finish. When we're working with WDS, Windows Deployment Services, let's drop back in and let's look at the actual images themselves. Now remember, we upgraded Remote Installation Services, so as we look at this Legacy Images folder, you can see there's my image, Windows Server 2003 Enterprise Edition. It's an x86, and you can see that it's an RI setup image. So we have a fair ability here in terms of creating and deploying images for Windows when it comes to WDS. Let's drop back out here. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in slide mode. Then we're going to come back and let's do a little bit more work with the WDS server. One of the things that we've talked about, but we haven't actually really done, is a discussion here of working with Windows PE. So let's take a couple of minutes and let's give you a little more detail on Windows PE and Windows PE's operation before we actually go back and finish our demonstration, shall we? Now, when we talk Windows PE can actually run much like a traditional operating system would. Now in this case, you have a WDS server and we have a client who's coming online. Now the Windows PE operating system, unlike the traditional operating systems that we're used to using, Vista, XP, Server, etc., who all run off of disk space, Windows PE does not run from disk. It runs from RAM, so it runs directly from memory. In fact, Windows PE, although it runs from memory, is an operating system that has a graphical user interface, recognizes many of the Windows Vista applications, it will detect and enable most modern hardware, and it can communicate with IP networks. Now, Windows PE typically consumes less than 100 megabytes of disk space on its own. Now, as we start adding additional applications, obviously the disk space consumption or the memory consumption is going to go up. Now, remember that WinPE can run entirely from RAM. So it enables us to insert, for example, a CD that might contain drivers and software, and we can actually load that using Windows PE. This enables Windows PE to run on computers that don't currently have formatted hard disks or installed operating systems. Remember, we can do bare metal installs with WDS because of WinPE. Now, an IT department could configure a Windows Deployment Services remote deployment infrastructure, create a simple configuration script, and then build a custom WinPE image to actually enable a fairly highly automated deployment process. Now, you don't have to have expensive tools and an incredible amount of knowledge to do this. The WDS server is going to use WinPE. We're going to pass that to the client, and that's how we're going to start the process of deployment. So, process begins when a new computer connects to the network. The built-in pre-boot execution environment client contacts WDS server, and WDS downloads to the client the customized WinPE image. Now, this is the point that's really cool. As an administrator, you have the ability to define what's in the Windows PE image. So you know your environment, you know what your needs are, you customize the WinPE image, and then as that's downloaded to the client, you now have a custom WinPE environment ready to do configuration or deployment in your network based on your network's needs. The new computer loads the Windows PE environment into RAM, runs the configuration script that we wrote, which verifies that the computer's configuration meets our IT department's hardware needs, and then if necessary, the script will actually back up the user's data to a shared folder, for example, on another computer, and then we move into the process of deployment. Windows PE is such an excellent tool. Notice that I can use Windows PE with no operating system resident on the client, or if an operating system is resident on the client and I want to move through the process of backup and upgrade. The script could, let's say we're on a bare metal machine, the script could actually run the diskpart utility and partition the hard drive or the hard disk in preparation for a deployment of the Windows Vista operating system. So lots of power here. Finally, in our example, we will go ahead and use the script to connect to a shared folder location that would contain the Vista setup files and then run the Vista setup program to install the operating system in a fully unattended mode. You could literally do this with no touch. Now, the most powerful and flexible way to distribute Windows PE is actually within a WIM file. And we need to talk about WIMs in a little bit more detail. When we're working with Windows PE images, we say the most powerful way is to work with them inside of a WIM. Like Windows Vista, Windows PE can actually be contained inside of a WIM file. Remember, a WIM file contains multiple images. However, when you store a Windows Vista image in a WIM file, the only way to start Vista is to copy the image to the computer's hard disk. WinPE, however, remember, can start directly from a WIM file without being copied to the hard disk because it can run in RAM. This functionality actually enables you to create a WIM, store it on a bootable media like a CD or a USB flash drive, for example, start Windows PE directly from that medium. Now, Microsoft uses this ability to load Windows PE into RAM and then run Windows PE when you install Windows Vista on a new computer. So you'll actually see this when you do your initial installs of Windows Vista. We drop the PE environment onto a DVD, load that into RAM, and then we load Windows Vista as an operating system. PXE boot of the WIM image is only supported currently with WinPE 2.0 images. So if you are looking at prior edition WinPE, that would not be supported for PXE boots. Now, if you're using current version of BDD with the Windows Automated Installation Kit, you're going to have the version 2.0 of WinPE, so it's not going to be an issue for you at all. For those of you that have prior edition scripted installs with WinPE earlier versions, you're going to want to upgrade those and use the 2.0 version rather than the 1.0 version. Let's go in here and let's spend a little bit of time in demonstration mode, shall we? Let's drop back over, and we're going to look at our domain controller again. And this time we're going to do a little bit of work with customizing that WDS server that we've already built. Now, the first thing we want to do, and you can see I've got it set on the screen here, we want to go in and we want to work with a Windows PE boot images, or a boot image. So let's go in and let's add a WinPE boot image. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit slow refresh on your screens, it looks like here. We're going to add an x86 boot image using the console. And then we're going to look at how we use the command line tool for the same task. Now, when using Windows PE boot images, those images must be prepped using something called Ximage. This is a command line tool. We've used it to manage Windows images or WIM files. The boot.wim image included on Windows Vista includes media that you're going to use with automated installs. Now, Windows Automated Installation Kit does provide boot images that you can use in something called its PE Tools folder. So we're going to go in, we're going to select a WIM. You can see I've got mine selected, Windows Automated Installation Kit. I'm actually using the PE Tools folder, and we're going to use the Windows Longhorn PE x86 product tool. Now, the boot.wim that's included on Windows Vista installation media is actually not a WDS prepped boot image. So you will want to go in and use the one that we're showing you here. Now, the wizard pulls the metadata information contained within the image to fill in the image's name. And as you can see, we get a quick summary, and here is my image. Oh, that is too easy. That is incredibly easy. Let's go down and let's hit the Properties dialog box here. And let's show you a little bit of what we might do in terms of properties with WIMs. Now, when we look at the WIM properties, once the image file has actually been imported, we right-click, we hit Properties. The Properties dialog box allows us to see information about the WIM, although there really isn't a configuration option available. When you want to use WDF to capture an image, we go in and we can use the Create Capture Boot Image tool here. This will create a new boot image, and then you'll need to actually import it into WDS. We have this option, Create Discover Boot Image. This is what you would use when you have a computer that does not support PXE. The Discover Boot Image is actually burned to a CD with all the information that you would need to boot most computers out there to a Windows PE environment and then connect to a WDS server. Since we have computers with different architectures, we'll also need to import a boot image for AMD 64-bit systems. Now we're going to take this opportunity to see how the WDS util command line utility could actually be used to add an image. Now you can perform all the tasks available here through WDS console using the WDS utility. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use the get switch. So we're going to use WDS util. We're going to get server information. We're going to show ourselves some images. Now the show image switch returns information on all the image groups, the boot images, and the install images of the WDS server. Now if we scroll to the top of this list, we can see the boot image that we added using the wizard. Here we go. And you can see there's our x86 boot image. The image count there is 1, and it is the Longhorn WinPE image, exactly like we specified. Now many of the commands that you'll use when you're working with Windows Vista deployment are relatively lengthy. I won't be the, I'm not going to lie to you here. We're going to start typing this one in. They can be a little bit difficult to remember. Now the help files that install with Windows Automated Installation Kit will contain all of these commands, step-by-step guidance, make it a little bit easier for you. I'm going to go ahead and type this one in, and we're going to use an add command, WinPE boot image for the 64-bit architecture. We're going to show the progress. We're going to use the add switch telling the utility to add the image file path, then the image type, and then the display name, and here comes the display name. I'm sorry, I'm no good at typing and talking at the same time. Some people have a fear of speaking in public. I have a fear of typing in public, so I have to go slow and make sure I get it right. Here it comes. We run the show images command again here. Come on, finish successfully. There we go. So let's go in and run the same command. We're going to show images, and if we've done this correctly, we should be able to see a new 64-bit image that we've added with WDS util. And in fact, there it is. There's boot images for x64. Our image count, there is 1. And we have successfully added a new image with the WDS util. Let's go in now and let's add a Windows Vista WIM to the WDS server. Now Windows Deployment Server actually arranges the images that we're working with in groups. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in and add an image group. Let's go ahead and we're going to provide a simple name, one that we could easily recognize on our organization. In this case, I'm using a RC1 version of Windows Vista. You're going to be using RTM versions, obviously the final version. For this example, we're using an RC1 version. I'm going to go ahead and create this. It's called Windows Vista RCM. Now that I've got an image group, I can actually go in and we can change security to define who is actually going to get access. Now by default, you can see that any user that's authenticated to Active Directory by default would have the ability to read and execute and list folder contents for this particular image group. So we will actually maintain those permissions. Now you could customize those obviously and make your own. Let's go in, let's add an install image. Now with the image group in place, we're going to go in, we need to provide the location of a WIM file. Now on this server, we placed the Windows Vista installation media on the hard drive. Now in the sources folder, we should be able to find, there it is, boot.wim and install.wim. Now in our case, we need to make a quick decision. Which one of these do we actually want? Well, the one that we actually want is the install.wim file, so let's go ahead and select that one. let's give us some quick details, and you can actually see that the WIM file is relatively large. This particular install.wim is 2.3 gigabytes in size, so it's relatively large. This would be the reason that you are only going to see installation files for Windows Vista on DVDs. We're going to go ahead and use install.wim. Now the cool thing about a WIM file, remember, is that it can contain multiple images, and the install.wim for Windows Vista is going to contain all 7 versions of installation files for Windows Vista. You can see all of the additions here. We could have Business, Home, Ultimate. Now we don't need all of these versions. So we're going to go out and we're going to drop to just Windows Vista Business and Windows Vista Ultimate. Those are the 2 versions we're interested in deploying with this WIM. Now oddly enough, this is not going to save us a tremendous amount of disk space because of single instance storage. However, it will simplify the process of deployment for us. So we're going to go ahead and simply select the 2 versions that we want to use, and then we're going to go in and click Next. Now we could change the names. Notice that we are going to have the box checked for use default name and description for each image. If we were in an environment where we were building separate images for our sales team, our marketing team, our executive team, our accounting team, etc., we have the ability to go in and customize these. Right now, I'm going to leave them with their standard names. You can see our image file location. We've got our images selected. At this point, let's go ahead and click Next. We're going to add those Windows images to the group that we just created. And if all goes well, it should complete successfully without incident. Now this is going to take a few minutes, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to drop back, and we're going to talk for a second while the image import process actually occurs. We've talked about introducing Windows deployment services. We've talked about exploring the WDS environment. We need to kind of finish things off with talking about implementing and managing Windows deployment services. So what I'd like to do is simply this. Let's talk in a little bit of detail about what exactly we would get with implementing a WDS environment. When we look at WDS management is actually relatively easy to accomplish. WDS management, because of the rich set of tools that we have associated with WDS, is actually fairly easily facilitated. Because we have a single set of management tools, a single user interface, graphical tool that's easy to work with, it runs as a Microsoft Management Console tool, it's fairly usable for all common tasks. You can set up and configure image groups, you can import images, you can work with WIM files, you can work with Windows PE. We've seen all of those things. Now I know that there are some of you out there that are going to want to do complex tasks associated with Windows deployments. Can you do that? Absolutely. There is a WDS util command line tool. I showed it to you in the previous demonstration. One of the reasons I did that is because you need to know that with the WDS util command line tool, anything you can script can be done. So both of those tools, the standard management graphical tool and the WDS util command line utility, will allow you to functionally accomplish just about anything you can think of in the Windows Deployment Services environment. Now we also told you in the last demonstration that it is possible to connect, do administration from a standard client machine. It does not have to be done locally. So management of WDS can be done remotely, it can be done locally. We aren't actually stuck doing administration from the local machine, which provides us with, I think, a significant benefit. There are other benefits of working with WDS management or other WDS management utilities. These are actually included in the WAIK, the Windows Automated Installation Kit. There is a WDS capture utility. It's a graphical utility that you can use to capture images into a WIM format. There is a light version of the ImageX or Ximage capture functionality. ImageX is a simple utility. It's a command line utility. You run it from the command prompt or from Windows PE. The batch scripting feature in Windows Vista, actually very versatile. You can script ImageX to do almost everything with the image that you might need. ImageX also allows us to do not only capturing of images, but it also allows us to mount images in a file system. And this is significant because mounting an image in a file system allows us to modify the content of the image, just like you'd modify any other file or folder on a file system, and then unmount the image without having to go and recapture the image. So it saves us a huge amount of time as opposed to the old way where we actually rebuilt the disk images from scratch. Give you a fast example. Let's say that your organization is deployed an image, and you decide you need custom drivers attached to that image for hardware that you have in your organization. In the old days, getting that driver added to the image is essentially the process of rebuilding the image. Today, not so. We can easily go in, mount the image using ImageX into the file system, and then use that mounted image to make changes to the contents, like the drivers, and then drop right back, unmount the image, and we're ready to deploy. The time savings and the cost savings during that process are fantastic. Let's talk about the image capture process for just a few minutes. Capturing an image starts with creating a WDS capture image from an existing WinPE boot image using the management tools. So we start with WinPE with capturing, just like we start with WinPE in deployment. WinPE kind of becomes our base or our starting point for all the things we do with WDS. So we start WDS capture process by starting WinPE. Once we've got WinPE up and running, WinPE is going to come back and it's going to tell us, hey, you're going to need an operating system reference computer. Now, whether the operating system is already installed or whether we want to install an operating system, really up to us. In this case, let's say we were building a WIM and we wanted a custom WIM just our way. We'd start Windows PE, we'd build the operating system exactly the way that we wanted it. At this point, we customize the operating system to meet our organization's need, meaning we can add whatever applications we want, whatever drivers we might need. We do all of the configuration for the machine. When we're done, we go in and we sanitize the box. Now, when I say sanitize, what I really mean is sysprep the box. We still use sysprep to remove unique identifiers like security identifiers or SIDs from the computer. We want you to do that. It allows us to have a clean WIM that's ready for deployment, and then we can fill in that necessary unique information. Once we've gone through, we've customized the install, we've run the sysprep process, we now actually go to the capture. And we actually boot into a WDS capture image. After running the WDS capture utility, which honestly just takes the snapshot of the image itself, we then have our new image created. We upload the image to our WDS server. Now, we've seen this. We did this in the prior demonstration for you. Instead of going in and creating the image, actually making our own custom image, instead I use the default install.wim. Now, in the next demonstration, I'll actually go and show you how to capture an image from an existing client. We'll use the WinPE, and I'll show you how this process works. In the previous example, we just used the install.wim, and we loaded that into WDS. Now, once you've uploaded the image to the WDS server, it's placed in the image store that you create. In our case, we call it Windows Vista RC1. Now, when we're working with image stores, the image store is really fairly simple in terms of structure, and you can see it here. It's a very easy to navigate file structure with the images stored in image groups. Now, we talked about this earlier. WIM files use single instance storage and compression to reduce the size of the image files. Now, file resources are located within the same res.rwm file, which is a resource-only WIM file. Now, when you're referencing an image, both the name and the image group need to be referenced. Now, we mentioned earlier the most common tasks can be accomplished through WDS management utilities. What I'd like to do is go in, we're going to drop out of slide mode and back to demonstration, and I'd like to show you how relatively easy it is to go in and use PXE boot and capture a client boot image. It really is not a significant challenge. Let's drop out here. Oh, sorry about that. Let's hit back in one more time. Looks like I had a little problem with my share there. My apologies. Try that one more time. There we go. That's what we want to see. Now, we went in, and remember before we finished in our last demonstration, we were capturing that install.wim and added it to our image group. Now what we want to do, let's go ahead and click Finish here. We're going to go now and we're going to look a little bit at this image that we captured, and then we're going to actually capture an image ourselves. So you can see the images. There's our business image, and there's our ultimate image that we had set up in the last demonstration. Let's go in and let's look at the properties. Let's look at the general tab. Here's where we actually get some of the control over the naming and the description. You can see this is an install image. Its current state, its architectural type, its description, the image group that it's part of. I'm going to check this box, allow image to install in unattended mode. Now when I do that, it gives me the opportunity to go in and specify an unattended file. So I can use an unattend.xml file that we've created with Windows System Image Manager, which is actually included with the Windows Automated Installation Kit. And I can create an unattend.xml file that actually allows this version of this image to install unattended. The cool thing is the ease of doing this is beyond belief. It's something that any of you can pick up and do without any particular knowledge beforehand. Now, how do I do it? Remember, use the Windows Installation Kit or the Image Management Kit. We're going to go in Windows Automated Installation Kit. Let's look at the versions information for this particular WIM or this image. You can see that security stuff there. Remember, by default, authenticated users are going to have rights to the image. This is very important because this is not the same as the image groups properties. So I could actually go in and I could actually deny users rights to use specific images. Now as you're working with permissions, same rules apply here as always. If I put a deny in place here, it's going to override the other permissions that we've seen in the past on this particular image. Now, I'm going to go in and we're going to restart this machine. Now I've actually switched. I'm using a different virtual machine. I'm going to restart it, and you'll notice that I'm going to actually boot this from a PXE boot disk. So I've used a PXE boot floppy, and we're going to boot to Remote Installation Services. Here we go. Now, we want to use Remote Installation Services because we want to actually capture ourselves an image. Now we have the option when we use the pre-execution boot environment. In this case, you can see it. I have the option to boot direct to an install. So I could say, give me the install of that Windows Longhorn server. Or I could say Remote Installation Services. In this case, let's go ahead and let's boot to the Windows Longhorn server install. Now notice, see what's happening? I've got all the files associated with this server. I've created them, saved them in the storage group. I could, if we wanted to do so, allow this process to continue. It would load Windows Longhorn server, and by the time the process completes, I have a Windows Longhorn server running and ready to go. Now, in this case, we probably should not do that because this is going to take a long time, a very long time actually. So let's drop back over here and let's do a little bit more work with this server. So when I'm looking at image metadata, here's my Longhorn PE server. It's not really explicit, or not real self-explanatory to my groups what they're actually installing. It would be much easier if I gave it a simple name like this, Windows Vista Marketing Department, and then specified an image description that was a little bit better for me in terms of what its contents were. And so I'm going to go ahead and say Vista image, customized for the marketing department, and I'm happier with that. Now in terms of location and file names, what are we going to capture? We're going to capture an image. We're going to drop it into remote install folder. We're going to put it in boot, and this is an x86 image. And let's go ahead and call it capture _ marketing. So what we've done in terms of pre-work here, we've gone in and we've built ourselves an image already. The image is located on our client computer, call it a workstation computer. Now we go and we specify, here's the client machine, here's its name. Now we're going to go back out. Here's my Vista client. I'm going to go ahead and log in here. Now on my workstation, what I'd like to do is a simple concept. We're going to take this workstation and we're going to capture it as an image file that can actually be deployed using WDS. So we're going to go in, we're going to open a file location. Let's expand this up. Now, we're going to use a simple command set here. For the legacy operating system, you had to download the sysprep tools. However, these tools are actually included on your Windows Vista machines in a directory called sysprep. So I'm going to switch to the sysprep directory. I told you in the slide mode that in order for us to do a prep, we have to go in and we have to actually run sysprep to remove the SID or security identifier information. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go sysprep, OOBE, generalize. We're going to go reboot, so it reboots at the end. And I think that's right. That looks good. Sysprep's going to go ahead and get started here. Sysprep command is going to prep the image for the capture. It's going to clean out all of our various user and computer settings, our log files, our security identifier information. Since Sysprep's automatically going to reboot the computer, we're going to go ahead and put in our PXE disk. Here it goes. And we're going to go ahead and allow Sysprep to boot to Windows. There it is. Look, Windows Vista Marketing Department. Now in this case, we're going to load Windows PE, right? When we do, Windows PE, instead of loading an operating system, like in the previous example where I showed you was going to load Windows Longhorn Server, in this case, we're going to boot to Windows PE, and instead of actually loading the operating system, instead, we're going to load Windows PE into RAM. Here it comes. See, you can actually watch it load the files. It's a fairly efficient system. It's going to load those files into RAM for us, and it should come up, if we've done everything correct, and tell us we're ready to run a capture. Cross your fingers and hope. Oh, I love it when it works right. So welcome to the Windows Deployment Services Image Capture Wizard. So Windows PE is a pretty smart tool. We defined that we wanted to run an image capture. We defined the capture's name. We load that onto, when the user PXE boots, we're ready for a capture, and the capture process starts. Let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and start this capture. The capture is going to go ahead and begin running for us, and we're not going to see anything for a significant amount of time. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and drop back into slide mode. You've seen the major portion of what it would take to capture an image. Once the image completes, we'll actually see the image show up back in the image group that we created on the WDS tool. So it would be there under that name that we created, Windows Vista Marketing. And when a user wanted, or when we were ready to deploy that, we go back through, we do the same steps. We prep it for deployment, we define the permissions on the image, and then when the next user comes in, we use the WinPE tool, and instead of doing a capture, we now do a deployment. I love this tool. It is so easy to work with. It is, without question, the best tool that we have seen for deployments in a Windows environment. Now, let's do some finish work here. Legacy WDS mode is Windows Deployment Service binaries with RIS functionality. Now, in this mode, only the OS chooser will be present as the boot operating system. In this mode, the new WDS management tools will not be in use. Instead, legacy RIS utilities would be the only way to manage the server. Legacy Windows Deployment Services mode can only exist on Windows Server 2003. There is another mode, thank heaven. Otherwise, we'd be unhappy. Mixed mode environment. Now, in a mixed mode environment, and you've just seen it, we were working in mixed. In WDS mixed mode, we use it to describe a server state where both the OS chooser and the Windows PE boot images are available. Now, in this mode, access to the old image types for the RI setup and the RIP prep images will be possible through OS chooser. In addition, will also be possible to get the new WIM format images through a Windows PE boot image. Windows Server Longhorn Windows PE boot images with a WDS client, like legacy mode, WDS mixed mode only exists on Windows Server 2003. So in a Windows 2003 environment with WDS in mixed mode environments, I get a lot of benefits. However, we are not native mode, and in fact could not get to a native mode because we're running on a Windows 2003 platform. So let's talk native mode for just a second. Native mode describes a WDS server with only Windows PE boot images. Now in this mode, OS Chooser is not present. So those old RipPrep and Riz images would not even be available to you. We wouldn't even know how to address them. WIM images would be the only supported image type to be deployed to the clients. Now, management of the server would occur entirely from within the new WDS management utilities. WDS native mode can exist on both the Windows Server 2003 and on the Windows Server Longhorn boxes. However, on the Windows Server Longhorn, this is the only supported WDS server mode. So as you move to Longhorn Server, you can only do native mode. Longhorn Server will not translate backwards for you to provide RIS or OS Chooser compatibilities. You can get to native mode in a Windows Server 2003 environment, and the way we would do that would be by running only Windows PE components 2.0 versions and running current version WIMs. So it is possible to move to those modes on Windows Server 2003. However, it is the only option. Native mode is the only option on Longhorn Server. Now we have talked about a number of different concepts today, and I'd like to go back and I'd like to do a little bit of summary stuff with you. In summary, WDS is the new improved RIS. We've introduced the 3 different WDS components. We've talked about client components, server components, and management components. We've talked about how to manage the WIM files. We've talked about using the Windows PE environment. We've talked about boot images and deploying images. We've shown you how to capture images with WDS tools. This is, in my opinion, the best set of tools that I have ever worked with for image deployment. I've worked with a lot of them. How do I get them? How much do they cost is the big question. You get them along with the Windows Automated Installation Kit and the Business Desktop Deployment 2007 tools. Those tools are freely available online for download. How do I get them? You get them by simply going to the website and saying, I'd like to download the tools now and install them. Remember, they run on Windows Server 2003. They will also run, of course, on the new Longhorn Server as it is released. Watch for those, look for those. I can't tell you how impressed I am with the Microsoft team, the product team that builds WDS. They've done such a good job. I encourage you to go out, take what you learned today, put it into practice, and learn how to deploy images in your environment using WDS. Now, before we finish, there are a couple of things that I would like to highlight for you, and then we'll turn you over to Eric for our evaluations. First is this. I do not run a webcast, a live event, anything without talking about TechNet. If you have not got a TechNet subscription, now is the time to do it. I'm sure you are aware at the present time the TechNet subscription includes a single-use license to all of Microsoft's software. Let me say that again. It includes a single-use license to all of Microsoft software. Now, I have to give a few caveats. Obviously, you don't get the games. Secondarily, you will not get the MSDN development tools. MSDN has their own subscription. There is no need for us to provide subscription services to the MSDN tools. So you want to see what the server products are like. You want to learn how to use the new Windows Vista versions. You want to have the opportunity to work with the small business server or to work with emerging copies of Longhorn Server. You want to work with Office. All of that stuff is a fully licensed version. In this case, you can get what's called TechNet Plus Direct, where we don't actually send you anything. Everything is simply available for you on the TechNet website for you to come in and download. I think it is the single best tool that Microsoft has to offer. Its value is incredible. I put the stuff up on the screen here. This is the only thing that I sell, and the only reason I sell it is because it is worth it. Everything else, I tell you how it works. This I will actually say you should have. In case you were wondering, 2 free professional support incidents. The cost of the incidents alone outweigh the cost of the TechNet subscription. All right, enough of the sales pitch. If you aren't a TechNet subscriber, now would be the time to do so. You can see the link there, technet.microsoft.com. During the course of the session, I've been watching the question and answers pane. I see there are a few questions in there. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, I'm going to turn the time back over to Eric. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to drop into the question and answers pane, and I'll take some of these questions live while you guys do the survey. Now, the survey is really important to us. Take a couple of minutes, fill it out. I'm very interested in your comments. I'm interested in your feelings about the demonstrations today. We really want to make sure that these are a valuable resource for you, not only today, but moving ahead into future use as well. So give us your comments, give us your feedback. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you this morning. I'm going to turn this over to Eric to get you started on the evaluation, and then we'll come back and do a few questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I do want to put up a slide here, just kind of a little incentive to fill out a survey. And by attending this live webcast or any live webcast through June 2007 and submitting the evaluation, you will be entered into a drawing to win a 30 gigabyte Zune digital media player. So I'm going to put up the survey here and give you a chance to fill it out. There are two options: registered online and all other registrants. In addition to entering you into the drawing, it's also valuable feedback for us. You'll notice when you get to the evaluation, the survey, you can give numeric scores for the webcast. There's also a comment section, and if you have any comments about the webcast, we do read those, so I encourage you to fill that out. Chris, we are running short on time, but if you've got, we've got a couple minutes to try and answer some of the questions we have on.
Sure, let's do that. I'm looking at 1:25, is that right? We've got about 5 minutes here? Or are we about done? Oh, boy.
Sorry?
Yep. My apologies. I
Okay.
just looked at my clock. We got 3 minutes. Let's take what we can in the couple minutes here. Most of the questions are actually fairly straightforward here. First question. Tim says, what operating systems does a WIM file support? You can actually capture images into a WIM for whatever operating system you want. It's a great system. Because we're loading WinPE first and then doing the captures, you can essentially capture whatever you would like. Now, with that said, obviously, we would assume that you would capture and deploy things like Windows XP, Windows 2000, Windows 2003, supported Microsoft operating systems. However, the image format does not specify an operating system support. So, great question. RJ says, where do I get a copy of WinPE? It's the question of the hour. You get the copy of WinPE inside the automated installation kit for Windows. So the Windows AIK. That's where you would get a copy of Windows PE. Here's a question. Is Windows Vista, codenamed Longhorn, different from actual Windows Vista? Actually, Longhorn was the code name for both of those products. Windows Vista Longhorn and Windows Server Longhorn are actually two different products. So when you look at those images that I used, because I was using release candidate versions, they were actually called Windows Vista, codename Longhorn. As we look ahead to the future, starting in 6 days, Windows Vista is no longer codenamed. It is final named. When you buy it on the store shelves, it's called Windows Vista. The Longhorn codename is gone. Windows Server is still codenamed Longhorn because we don't have a final name for it. So they are two different products. It's a very good question. The Longhorn Server is actually available in beta format now. Hop online if you are a TechNet subscriber. It is available. You can download and start using it in beta form, which is really kind of nice. Peter says, can you use WDS for zero-touch deployment? You can. However, it's probably easier to use SMS for zero-touch deployment or BDD zero-touch deployment, and WDS simply becomes a part of that bigger process. With WDS, to get zero-touch deployment, you're going to have to write a series of unintended answer files, unattend.xml, for example, and provide unique information, which would make that zero-touch for the client. But yes, Peter, it is possible to do zero-touch with WDS. Last question. CS says, so we're able to create our own WIM files right now from our current installation CDs, and the answer is yes. All of the tools that I've showed you today can be used today with an installation CD. If you had an install CD of Windows Vista and the BDD 2007 with the automated installation kit, you could create your own WIM files, your own WDS deployment for your network today. There is no waiting. This is available now. I've loved spending the time with you today. We're 1 minute away from 12. I need to go ahead and wrap things up. If you guys are interested, let me give you an email address. My email is CHENLEY@Microsoft.com. I'll also drop that into the question and answer pane. If you have additional questions, don't hesitate to shoot me a quick email. I'll be glad to answer them for you. It's been my pleasure spending some time with you today talking about WDS deployments, and I look forward to seeing you again. Eric, the time's yours.
All right. I do want to thank Chris Henley for presenting today, and thank you everyone for attending today's webcast. That concludes today's TechNet webcast. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of this conference.